to the Wizard of Radical Self-Respect. My name is Jared Mello. Today we're going to go over how to teach your kids about narcissism, but a few things to clarify before I begin. One, this is not about teaching kids how to diagnose someone with narcissistic personality disorder. It is about teaching them about toxic behaviors and manipulation tactics, and recognizing behaviors are more important than any label. It's not about diagnosing someone as a narcissist, it's paying attention to potential problematic behaviors and red flags. The second thing is, anyone can mess up once, but the real issue will be a consistent pattern of these toxic behaviors. And that's something we will emphasize to the kids too. Anyone can mess up once, but if it's a consistent pattern, that is something to pay attention to. And third, as a parent, it's important that you understand narcissism and toxic behaviors first and foremost. We can't teach other people about things that we don't know about ourselves. Those are the three disclaimers here. But number one, the first thing I would say to kids is pay attention to how someone acts when you disagree, tell them no, or they don't get their way, because that will be a pretty good indicator of their character. And if they get really upset, if they rage, if they flip out, if they tell you you're crazy for disagreeing, or flip it on you somehow, or in other words, throw a temper tantrum, big thing. And if it happens more than once, an even bigger thing, and definitely not a red flag to ignore. And that's a pretty basic one that anyone can really see. If you disagree, tell them no, or they don't get their way, how do they act? And if they act ridiculously, or start blaming you, or calling you names or something, big thing to pay attention to. The second one would be double standards. And the best one would be to say, how do they act if you match their actions? If you match their actions and they get upset, big red flag. And again, in my own life, that was a simple one for me to be able to recognize. Oh, they're getting super mad at me because I'm treating them the way they treated me. I'm matching their actions and now they're mad. If that happens, that's another good indicator they have a problematic personality type, and it's a red flag. Happens more than once, definitely a red flag to not ignore. Another one would be, how do they treat kids around them? Do they make fun of people a lot? Do they bully people? Are they mean? But these are all simple things that you'll see amongst kids and say, hey, if this kid's bullying other people a lot, or maybe worse, he's bullying you, these are things to not ignore. And how do you even tell your child to respond to such a thing? Well, I'm a big advocate of teaching kids about martial arts. Not that you have to use it in an aggressive manner, but I do think it's important to be able to defend yourself, especially from bullies. But often, using the least amount of force necessary in any kind of debate or engagement is the best way to go. And often the best thing to do is walk away from bullies, because unless they're going to keep on coming at you. And if they're going to keep on coming at you, you might have to stand up strong and be assertive. But that's something to tell the kids about too, because that's something that happens a lot in elementary school, middle school, high school. How are they going to act when there's bullies around? Another thing to tell our kids would be, how do you feel after hanging out with somebody? Do you consistently feel worse after spending time with somebody? And then the follow-up question would be, why do you think that is? Are they bullying you? Are they making fun of you? Are they picking out your flaws? Are they always criticizing you? But if that becomes a pattern, that is another thing to pay attention to and to not ignore. And another one would be, do they say your feelings are wrong? And if you ever disagree and have a different opinion about something, are they telling you you're crazy or out of control or belittling you? Another thing that's pretty easy and cut and dry to see. But it's one thing to see all of these toxic behaviors, but then what do we do about it? And ultimately, what I would say, if someone displays those behaviors more than once, probably not somebody you want to spend too much time around. And granted, we got to use our judgment here, because in elementary school and middle school, people are pretty immature. People are still growing up, and some of these traits and temper tantrums may be a little more common. And that's why we got to really use our judgment with it. And each situation will need to be taken individually. And just because someone may act out twice doesn't always mean you should walk away. But what I would say to the kids is, as you get older and these behaviors remain consistent and persistent, don't ignore that. And a whole other layer of this will be when they're old enough to start dating. And maybe it's in high school when they start. And maybe at that point you would recommend and teach them a little bit about love bombing and what that might look like. If someone says they like all of the same things you like and dislike all of the same things you dislike, it doesn't always mean that in high school, because again, immaturity will be a thing, but it's just something to pay attention to. And then what I would say also is, not only with the love bombing, but see if they treat other people in the ways we mentioned before. How do they act when you tell them no? How do they act if you disagree? How do they act when they don't get their way? Do they have any double standards? Do they get mad if you match their actions? Do they bully others? Do they make fun of others? And another one would be, do they lie? And lying's a pretty simple one too, that you can spot if someone lies, if you have the proof. But if you don't always have the proof, that can be a little tougher as well. But there's two parts to this: identifying the toxic behaviors and then doing something about it. And depending on the age of the child, I would recommend things differently. But those behaviors that I mentioned at the beginning, those are the big ones to watch out for. And also, if you're watching a movie together, or TV, or YouTube, or whatever it may be, and you notice toxic behaviors in action, that becomes a teaching moment to teach your kids, oh hey, did you see that? That was gaslighting. Or did you see that? That was flipping the script. Or did you see that? That was playing the victim, or moving the goalposts, or twisting and distorting, or baiting, or provoking, or fill in the blank with whatever it might be. And there's, God knows, there's a lot that it might be. But all of those moments become teaching moments. And with all of this, keeping honest and open lines of communication with your kids, letting them be very comfortable sharing things with you, and being the safe person. And that does not mean you let them get away with everything. That does not mean you don't have any discipline. There is nuance to this too. It is not all black or all white. There can be a mix of the middle. And I think that's the best place to be, in my opinion. And to reiterate this whole video here, the things to teach kids: how do they act when they disagree? Or you tell them no, or they don't get their way. Do they throw temper tantrums? Do they rage? Do they play the victim? All things to pay attention to. Double standards. How do they act when you match their actions? Do they get super mad at you for matching their actions? That's a big thing to not ignore. Do they bully others? Do they make fun of others? Do they talk meanly behind people's back or even to their face? All things to pay attention to. And do they lie? And also, pay attention to how you feel after spending time with somebody. If you consistently feel worse, ask yourself why and say, hey, are they bullying me? Are they making fun of me? What is it? What's going on? All things to be mindful of. And when they're older, teach them a little bit about the love bombing, the mirroring of likes and dislikes, etc. But that will be more of an older kid kind of issue. And the other thing to note would be, again, the patterns. Anyone can mess up once, but a consistent pattern of bad behavior is the real issue to take note of. And that applies to all of us. And I don't know if you caught on to this, but everything I said here also applies to adults as well. All of these. Because a lot of times, how they act as a child will be, a little bit, at least how they act as adults. We like to think people mature into adulthood always, but I think we're learning more and more that is not always what happens. People can stay stuck at a pretty young mindset of like 6, 7, 8 years old sometimes. And it's unfortunate, but it definitely happens. But I think this is a good starting point of how to teach your kids about narcissism. Of course, it's not the whole thing, but depending on their age, this is a good place to start them out at, because it's basic, it's simple, and I think the simple things can be the most lasting and long-term effect. It can be the most helpful and the easiest to learn. As they get older, you can introduce more or maybe even tell them to watch creators about it, etc. But in the beginning, I think it's best if you do. And in worst case, you can tell them to listen to creators, etc., but chances are they're not going to anyway. And it might be over their heads either way. It might be too much for them and too mature for them too. So keep it to whatever their level is. And remember, as the parent, it's up to you to understand this as well. It's up to you to understand these toxic behaviors too, because we can't teach things that we don't know ourselves. But that's the video for today. If you got this far, please remember to subscribe to the video. Subscribe to the channel. Like the video if you liked it. Comment below if you have any other suggestions on how to teach kids about this kind of stuff. And again, this is about toxic behaviors. This is not as much about teaching people about narcissistic personality disorder. It's about identifying red flags and then what to do about it when you identify the red flags, because just simply identifying them without any actions, that's only half the battle. The actions and following through will be the big thing. And depending on a kid's age, you would have to give more or less leeway, depending on the kid's age. If someone's 5 and they throw a temper tantrum when they don't get their way, not the best, but they're still just 5 years old. Now, if they're 15 and they're doing it, well, that's a little bit worse, because now they're 15 and they're still acting like a 5-year-old. Again, we're going to have to use a little bit of common sense here too. But thank you very much for watching this video. Share this with others that you think might benefit, and thank you very much for watching.